Brent and Ryan in the morning. Good morning. I'm Brent.
And I'm Ryan.
And this is Brent and Ryan in the morning. And welcome to episode number 8. It's Tuesday, and we finally finished reading through the book of Acts. Right. We've gotten to the end. We're following all the journey of Paul and the establishment of the church. And there's so much detail in here that we could talk about, so much of this narrative story. But one of the things that really jumped out at me is when you read about Paul and all of these interactions that he had, he was a really smart guy.
Absolutely. We see it's like a clever, strategic mindset that he has to get through some of these tough situations. So last week we saw him say that he really wanted to get to Rome, and he kind of found a way to punch his ticket there for free. So as he's going through the trials with Festus and Agrippa, we get to the end of it where they basically say, he could have just gone free,
right.
But instead he plays this card where he says, I appeal to Caesar. And in that moment, he knows there's free trip. He's heading to Rome. And while that trip wasn't necessarily smooth sailing, wink, wink, chapter 27.
That was so bad.
But hey,
so bad.
Free is free. And so that's what he got with that.
Well, but he did have, like you said, the shipwreck on the way.
He did.
It wasn't all, an easy trip. But what's interesting, I found it very humorous, though, when he was in front of those guys and he was talking to them. One of the things that one of the leaders there says to him is he goes, Paul, too much study has made you crazy. I think that about you sometimes, Ryan. Too much study, little cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs.
I just love my Bible software.
That's right. But the other thing is that I love this moment where Paul is in front of the Jewish leaders. He's in front of the Pharisees and the Sadducees. And if you know anything about these two groups, you know that there was one major issue that, they just fought over all the time. Well, Paul knew this too. And so as he's in front of them, he looks at them and he tells them, he says, you know what? I am just on trial because I have hope in the resurrection of the dead. And of course, the resurrection of the dead is the main issue they're fighting over. And you almost get this idea that he throws this little hand grenade out there, and then he just kind of sits back and says, watches them kind of go at it together, So it's very funny how he was able to kind of use those situations. But, one of the things is that even though he was incredibly smart, he wasn't always able to use that to his advantage to get out of situations. He faced lots of trouble, too.
He found some real sticky situations, and there's one story where we read where he's in Ephesus. It's the beginning of today's reading, where he really creates the entire city ends up in an uproar because he's been such an effective preacher that the sale of silver idols has gone down. And the silversmiths had no problem with Paul teaching in his city until it started to affect the bottom dollar.
It's all fun and games until business goes down. Then we got a problem.
And so it created a big problem there. And he decided he was going to go out and try to talk to them until he said a little bit too much, and they were ready to murder him, and they had to grab him by the shirt and yank him back out of there.
Get out of there, Paul. He's in trouble.
Absolutely. So, Brent, is there anything else that jumped out to you as we were walking through the end of Acts?
There are some, as we've talked about, some interesting points and funny stories. It's like this poor kid named Eutychus. Paul is preaching, and not that any preacher we know would ever do this, but Paul just kind of goes on and on.
Through the whole night.
I mean, it's getting late, and this kid, I don't know why, where are this kid's parents? This kid's sitting in a window, and he falls asleep.
Trying to stay awake. Cool air.
I guess so.
Awake.
But there he is, and he falls asleep, and bam. He dies.
Dead.
And that's just, it's crazy, but it did make me feel good because then I thought, I have noticed occasionally when I've been preaching, few people will be in prayer for extended periods of time. Deep prayer for a long time.
Typically at the end.
But I could say that I haven't killed anybody. Well, not yet. Although there was a moment a few weeks ago where I thought I had come close.
Drink your water, Brent. Good.
There we go. But then we come to the end of Acts. And what we find here is it's interesting because we know that Peter and Paul were killed for their faith, but that's not mentioned. So we know that the story Luke was done writing before those things happened. And we're kind of left with a cliffhanger.
Paul's preaching, and essentially we just have this left wide open. The gospel is going forward as people preach. And so really Acts extends to us today.
Absolutely. And we are the rest of the story. And those that come after us and the legacy that we're leaving behind. So it's exciting. But then we kind of turn a corner, and then we move into the letters of the New Testament that Paul wrote. And the first one that we have, the earliest one that we think that we believe he's written, is the letter we know as 1 Thessalonians. So what did you see there? Kind of a short letter, but there's certainly a lot packed into that short letter.
Yeah, the verse that jumped out to me, or the little section in that letter that jumped out the most, was where Paul was describing just his incredible focus on how he wants nothing more than to see people come to know Jesus. So he basically says, my purpose is to please God and not man. He's not doing anything to try to worry about what other people think about him or how he's doing things. And basically he continues on saying, I'm not also doing this for praise, and I'm not trying to do this to just get your money. It's not about that. I don't care about what you think of me. I care what God thinks, and I care about your souls.
That's right.
And that's just one of those moments where I think it's a reminder for us, where rather than just going to church and playing nice at church, we have to remember that what we do matters, and we're on a mission for people's souls. We need to focus like
There's
Paul's
a seriousness here, and we've got to break out of this building sometimes in order to make that happen. You know, one of the things that stuck out to me in 1 Thessalonians was this idea of what's to come and the hope that we have in the future, and Paul really talks a lot about that when Jesus returns. But it also kind of got me thinking that sometimes we can get a little too focused on that. We don't want to live as though Jesus is not coming back. But we can't live so far into that we are no good here on earth to the people around us. And, you know, the people there at that time, they were selling their possessions, and they were kind of going and living on the hillside, just waiting, looking up into the heavens all the time, waiting
preppers.
Yeah, they were basically preppers. And it made me wonder, made me kind of think, there are times where we talk to people and they're like, well, let's read the newspaper today and let's see, oh my goodness, look at this. Well, this happened over in the Middle East, so this means Jesus is about to come back.
Stop. I know who the Antichrist is.
Let's just say this, stop it. Just stop it right now. That is not helpful. That is not even good Christians. That's no good. You might as well try to be a psychic and Miss Cleo or whoever, to try to read the tea leaves and figure out, no, this is not why it was written. The important thing for us to remember is not how it's all going to happen or even when, but that it is going to happen, that Jesus is going to come back. We have that hope that even though things in this world are broken now, there will be a time when Jesus comes back and fixes it. But we don't know when that'll be.
So be ready.
Be ready, and let's live in a way that encourages others to join us. And like you said earlier, sharing that faith, bringing others in, living to please God. And that really is the most critical part of what I think Paul was saying there. Well, Ryan, there we go. That's a couple of days. We've turned out of Luke and Acts. We're reading Paul's letters now.
All through the letters.
And so here we go. So I believe we're going to pick up tomorrow with 2 Thessalonians and move on through some other letters. So I'm excited to see what you pick up, what they pick up, and we'll be back here in a day or two to talk about it some more. This has been Brent and Ryan in the morning. We'll see you guys later.